Pussy Riot thing started, they'd been in existence for about a year, and they came out of a performance art group called Grupa Wojna. They went along to a lecture that was about feminism and announced that they'd been inspired by the Riot Girl movement, and they were going to set up a feminist punk band, and they were going to call themselves Pussy Riot. In February at Christ the Saviour Cathedral, they did this 40-second performance of this so-called punk prayer, which was called Virgin Mary, Chase Putin Out. They went into the church, 40-second performance, doing the can-can, wearing their balaclavas of a not very musical number, and then they were evicted. The charge was hooliganism motivated by religious hatred. The fact they were charged with that rather than a public order type offence was all about making it that they'd offended religious people, rather than making it about their freedom of speech and the fact it was a political protest. One of the things that was obviously much discussed during the trial was the whole question of why Pussy Riot were put on trial in the first place, particularly if you bear in mind that they weren't arrested at the scene of the crime, they were just tracked down later. Their view would be that there was political interference at some point and the church was put up to complaining about this issue. The way the judiciary works, again, you know, in theory it's an independent judiciary, but many people would say that actually the final decision as to what happened to them, what sort of sentence they got, would have gone all the way to the top and Putin would have been involved.
I love the name Pussy Riot because they, in interviews, the band members actually said that they wanted to take the idea of the female sex organ, which is denigrated in just about every culture, as we know. And they have taken that and they've said specifically, we are going to make this the site of a rebellion against this patriarchal order. And I think that's one of the reasons it's, you know, their challenge to Putin is so powerful, because a man like Putin, the last thing he ever expected to have to deal with was a bunch of women who called themselves after the vagina.
I think it's fairly obvious that, you know, if there'd been three men, you wouldn't have had the same attention. If they'd perhaps just gone into the cathedral and held up placards and done, you know, or read out speeches or whatever, it wouldn't have had the same attention. It was the whole sort of performance art element of it, if you like, the fact they looked the way that they did, the fact they had this very strong image, them with the balaclava sort of hiding their faces and wearing very brightly coloured clothes. All those things sort of help in terms of, yeah, the fact they have this very strong Pussy Riot brand.
It shows the power of music, doesn't it? Even though what they did to most people isn't really music, but it was served up on a platform that looked like music.
Yeah, the advantage that music has over other forms of protest is you've got the words, you've got the lyrics, then you've got the visual image, which they're very strong on. Then you've got the noise, sort of the visceral quality, and it does convey dissent, unrest, you know, the sheer sound that they make, even if you can't understand the lyrics, conveys that message. So if you just watch a clip, you know, a few seconds on YouTube, you get the message right away.
Pussy Riot were seen as a threat. So you had the victim's lawyer saying things like, feminism is a mortal sin. So, because the women were trying to explain that they were trying to enlist the Virgin Mary's help to chase Putin out.
Looking at the rhetoric of Pussy Riot and what the band members have said, they're clearly acting on very, very feminist ideas about gender, about patriarchy, about LGBT issues. And
there was all this other rhetoric around their values being a threat to Russian society. It's the fact they operate outside the mainstream.
This is a really big moment, I think, for the return of feminism, and to discover that there are these young women saying very, very similar things in a very articulate way in Russia. I think it's given the protest a kind of force and a kind of sense of identification that it wouldn't otherwise have had. It's a kind of moral relativism which says that, you know, until everything is sorted out, we can't protest. But the people who are brave enough to go up against regimes like President Assad, to go against people like Putin, they need every bit of support they can get. And I think if you talk to them, you know, you find that they are incredibly glad that these issues are being talked about in other countries.
People have said what would happen if Pussy Riot did it in the UK. And actually, you know, I suspect they would have been sent away with a slap on their wrists. Peter Tatchell stormed the pulpit when the Archbishop of Canterbury was in the middle of a sermon, caused a fracas, and he was fined £18. So that's what I say, well, that's the closest thing to Pussy Riot, although actually Pussy Riot didn't interrupt a church service.
They pose a threat to Putin because he knows how to deal with conventional protest. Now, what he was blindsided by, I think, was a protest which isn't anything like that. Suddenly, to have a group of young women, rather slender young women too, not sort of powerful figures in a physical sense, actually doing this and saying, Virgin Mary, drive out this man. I think that's actually why he has been so angry and why he's pursued this trial, really against his own interests, because it's generated a huge amount of interest in what he's doing in Russia, which wouldn't otherwise have existed.
Putin obviously feels threatened because he wouldn't put them in jail otherwise, but I don't know where the threat's coming from. Is he threatened directly by Pussy Riot, or is he more threatened by the power of the church? He only just got in the last elections, and the church is worth an awful lot of votes in Russia. So I wondered if that was what he's frightened of. If they turned against him, he'd lose a lot more votes. I think Pussy Riot is important for a lot of reasons, really. I think obviously because you can't really put people in prison for doing something that's ostensibly music as a protest. It just seems ridiculous getting put in jail. I think it's a mistake for the Russian government to do it as well, because it completely legitimises what they're singing about.
I think in terms of what Pussy Riot have achieved, I mean, obviously that spotlight of the world on Russia is important. When you've got people like Madonna playing to absolutely huge crowds and writing Pussy Riot on her back, that is something that if you were in Putin's position, you wouldn't want to see happen.
If you follow a Pussy Riot video on YouTube through to reading their statements, that's a very powerful journey in which you're going to learn a lot in a very short space of time. And that's why they've managed to shine a light on what's going on in Russia in a way that trials of other kinds of people, of lawyers or oligarchs, don't do.
Yes, to an extent it's about the fate of those three women, but it's also has much wider ramifications than that.